everyone who has made the time to join today's webinar. I'm just going to ensure I can see the other screen as well, so just going to stretch that out. Right. So today's session is about aligning your procurement, your tender processes with PPN 06. Don't worry too much about any jargon or acronyms, because I'll describe all of them to you throughout the session. Having said that, PPN 06 stands for Public Procurement Notice that was published in 2020 in the month of June. And then once I describe that, I'll take you through a case study. So this is a consultancy client that we did a project with last year. This is in the healthcare industry, and the nature of the project was construction redevelopment. So first, a little bit about social value. What does that mean? And of course, I'll take you through a few of the jargon as well. Some of the common terminology, because I'm anticipating those questions are going to come in the Q&A section. I'll talk to you a little bit about ESG, social value, sustainability, sustainable procurement. How do all of these concepts and terminology fit in? Describe PPN 06, the themes, and then of course we'll go straight into the project. So making a start, just a few house rules. So you have the Q&A function. Do use the Q&A function for any questions you may have and for any technical support. I have with me on the call or the webinar today, Billy from the events and marketing team, and Billy will help you with any technical support, and I'll answer all of the Q&A right at the end. Yes, you will get a copy of the slide deck, and I've also sent a couple of resources to Billy. So when you get a thank you email with the slide deck, I have attached some relevant resources from today's webinar for you as well. And please share your feedback at the end, as we're always looking to better what we deliver in terms of content and style to you as well. Right. The agenda for today. Yes, I will introduce myself in a while. Don't worry about that. Then we'll talk about social value in the legislative context, the two important pieces of legislation. Concentrating on PPN 06 2020, what are the themes of social value? What are the objectives within it? What is the context for commercial and procurement teams to think about? And then we'll do a deep dive into that actual consultancy project. What was the task at hand? What were the requirements? What were the actions that we took as Action Sustainability to meet their requirements? What was the outcomes from that? And we talk about the reporting and metrics piece, which is very, very important in terms of sustainability and social value. Then we go to Q&A at the end, and of course the feedback as well. So introductions. Hi, I'm Mellita D'Silva, and I work for Action Sustainability and the Supply Chain Sustainability School. I've got about 18 years experience as a procurement manager, also dealing with sustainable procurement, social value. Sustainable procurement is my area of expertise, dealing in social value as well. So I'm going to make a start in terms of social value, but like I said, I'm just going to talk to you about all of the related concepts, because I very, very often get the question, people are confused as to what all of these different terminology mean. So sit back, relax, and take it all in. Let's start with ESG. So ESG as a concept was developed as a risk-based analysis by agencies who were more interested in mitigating the risks, good stuff, but they weren't really concentrated on added value or measuring any of the value that was created. So it was conceived by assuming that you as an organization or as a project, you can only ever have a negative impact on people, planet, and profits through your operations. So all about negative impacts and mitigating those risks. So that is ESG for you. Sustainability falls within three spheres or three pillars, and that's your economic, social, and environmental. That's this diagram here, but don't worry too much about it, because I'll talk you through that on the next slide. Having considered what your sustainability risks, opportunities, and ambitions are in that space, embedding it in a systematic manner in procurement, so right from early supply, early contractor involvement, PQQ and ITT, which is your RFI and RFP stage, into your awarded contract, out to your supply chain, and then achieving those goals and targets that you set for them. That whole thing is sustainable procurement. The outcome, not the output, the outcome of sustainable procurement is social value. Let me give you a very, very simple example here. So having worked in a large infrastructure project, because of the geographical location through which it was passing, we had to cut down some trees. That was being mitigated by trees being planted elsewhere. But what could we do with the trees rather than just, shave them into chips and, use them somewhere? So what the subcontractor came up with is to use the bark, and these were really strong trees, a type called London plane, PLANE. They used the trunk of the trees to saw them into planks, and that was used to make benches for the local schools, for the local community, and for the local park. Now, the output, that is the benches, that is sustainable procurement, but that is not social value. The outcome is what you measure within the community. So the outcome was, because they made benches for the local school or the local park, a happier community or more children being able to attend school. So that's your outcome, and that's your social value or your added value. Hopefully this clarifies it a bit. I'm not going to go into too much detail here because this is not a sustainable procurement webinar. It's about PPN 06, but very, very quickly, your 3 spheres of sustainability: economic, social, environmental. Environmental is the angle that we all get really, really clearly. Most of the organizations and projects you work for will have net zero greenhouse gas and carbon emission targets. It's about pollution prevention. Environmental management, we've got the plastic packaging tax now come into play, reducing the use of natural resources. The other 2 spheres, social and economic, they do get I wouldn't say ignored, but they're not really easy to understand, and it often gets forgotten about. Economic is about cost saving. So by reducing or challenging the needs, so bulk buy, economies of scale, ensuring you're wasting less or reducing on packaging, for example, but ensuring the profitability not just of yourself, but of your supply chain as well. Social, community engagement and investment, education, things like volunteering, charities, STEM activities, equal opportunity, not just within your organization, but also within the supply chain. So these are your spheres of sustainability, having embedded it into procurement, into the contracts of your supply chain and out to them for them to deliver on. What you're doing is you're generating social value rather than expecting ad hoc social value out there on the side. So generated social value is when you consider what are the risks and impacts in this trade, in this works package, in this category that I'm managing on this project or in my organization. Embed those questions into PQQ and ITC or early contract involvement as early as possible into the contract award. I will then be able to generate social value out inside. Social value is nothing other than the benefits to society from the delivery of your goods, works, and services overall on that triple bottom line pillars that we talked about. Right, so without wasting much more time, let's go into the legislative context for social value. So 2 very important pieces of legislation here. So back in 2012, we had the Public Services Act 2012, but the wording in this piece of legislation is very, very different from PPN 06. So how does it differ? Public Services Act 2012, the wording in there talks about consider. So consider how what is being procured, whatever that is, goods, work, services. Consider how what is being procured might improve economic, social, environmental well-being. So what this says to us here is consider, it's an addition, it's a nice to have, it's a suggestion, almost like a good to have or a tick box exercise. It did not make taking social value into account in procurement mandatory at all. Cut to 2020 and PPN 06, social value is now mandatory. So taking social value into account in the award of all central government contracts, whether it's a theme of effective stewardship of the environment or uplifting certain sectors of society, for example, whether it's diversity or inclusion. Don't worry too much about the word mandatory because there are in-scope organizations and out-of-scope organizations. So don't everyone go rushing trying to implement this. Let me take you through what's within this PPN 06. Quickly, your in-scope organizations that absolutely need to use PPN 06 as a social value guide in the procurement is central government departments, executive agencies, non-departmental public bodies. Construction, capital investment, and infrastructure projects that start to cross the £10 million threshold also need to use PPN06 as their social value model. Having said that, if you're an out-of-scope organization, let's say in the private sector, but you're bidding for work with any of these in-scope organizations, then of course you also have to use the PPN06 and consider social value in your tender returns and bid returns as well. Why PPN06 and why social value? What was the government trying to achieve? Yes, best commercial outcome in the procurement and contract management process, but also to ensure that they were supporting not just commercial outcome, but your key social outcomes as well. Just give me a second. Right. A couple of things for us to consider if you're an in-scope organization. So procurement and commercial team. When they say select objectives that are relevant, I'll take you through what those are. So there are 5 themes or 5 objectives of social value that sit within PPN06. And the reason it talks about select objectives that are relevant and proportional to the procurement, because the last thing you want to do is risk dump or dump all of the themes through all of your tenders, whatever you're buying, goods, work, services, hire or buy, rather than select what is appropriate, first of all, to the scope, the value of the works package or the contract, what's the duration of that works package or the scope, but most importantly, what's the nature of the supplier or subcontractor sat in your tender list? Are the questions based on the themes applicable only to large organizations or large players in the market? Are you asking robust questions or questions that are really difficult for SMEs to answer in terms of social value? Thereby, you're actually cutting out the diversity in your supply chain. So think about how you're going to phrase the questions, but also what themes within PPN06 you're going to select for your relevant categories and your works packages. So keep it relevant and proportionate. Explicitly evaluate social value, and that is don't hide it somewhere in your balanced scorecard. Yes, it usually comes in the qualitative aspect, but spell it out clearly in terms of sustainability or social value. And of course, give it a minimum weighting of 10% at least. So your balanced scorecard must include the social value to be there for the scoring and weighting in line with PPN06 and minimum 10% weighting. Another question I anticipate that's going to come out of today's session is, in my experience, what's the minimum and maximum weighting I have seen for social value on the balanced scorecard? So I've seen a really, really poor percentage of 2, something like 2% to 5%. The problem with that is you very, very quickly give the supply chain a feel that you're not really serious about sustainability and social value. For you, it's a tick box exercise, because you may have engaged early with your supply chain and included the questions in your PQQ and tender, but if out of 100% of a balanced scorecard, only 2% is for social value, you basically wasted your time and that of your suppliers to say, give me all these robust tender bids and returns back, talking about added value or social value, but you're not really scoring it or weighting it really high. The highest I have seen is actually on this project that I'm going to take you through a little later on in the session. They very, very bravely went with 44% of the balanced scorecard allocated to social value. That was a pleasant surprise for me. That didn't come without its challenges, however. Imagine trying to get consensus from internal stakeholders on 44% of your balanced scorecard allocated to social value. So hopefully I've anticipated some of your early questions and answered that for you then and there. According to PPN06, your bids should be evaluated in terms of qualitative responses coming back. Having said that, what we did in this project was both qualitative bid responses and quantitative. I'll give you exact examples of both, and I'll also tell you why we went down that route. So don't worry too much about the qualitative and quantitative responses at this stage in time. Right, like I said, you don't need to take notes. I've thrown up a lot of text on the screen. You will get a copy of the slide decks, but I'm going to talk you through what are the themes of social value that sit within this public procurement notice. What are the examples of topics around which you can start to ask questions in your pre-qualification or your ITT stage as well? So COVID-19 recovery. Some of the examples over here are things like creating employment opportunities, retraining, offering return to work opportunities, especially to those who've been left unemployed because of COVID-19, supporting physical and mental health and well-being, not just of your staff, but of your supply chain as well. Tackling economic inequality, some of the examples of questions that you can think about for your tenders here are opportunities for entrepreneurship, helping new businesses to grow, encouraging SMEs within your supply chain and value chain, removing any barriers for employment, encouraging attainment of educational achievements, for example, on your projects. So charterships, for example, or CSCS cards, any tickets relevant to site, SMSTS, triple STS, so on and so forth. But of course, relevant to the contract and project that you're working on. Encouraging diversity in the supply chain, supporting innovation and innovative products within your works packages, managing cybersecurity risks in the contract delivery. So quite a lot of examples for that theme there. Fighting climate change, most of us already have net zero greenhouse gas and carbon emission targets. So delivering that additional environmental positive benefits, but also things like reducing packaging, reducing single-use plastics, ensuring you're not polluting air and of course water as well, water use. So some of the things to think about in that space. Equal opportunity, ensuring the contract workforce probably has increased representation from persons with a disabled background, tackling inequality in skills, pay, for example, managing the risks of human rights issues, modern slavery, all during the duration of the contract, and encouraging your supply chain for that transparency as well, especially when it comes to human rights and modern slavery issues. Well-being, as the name suggests, you're demonstrating action to support health and well-being, not just within your staff and supply chain, but within the local community, improving cohesion within your local community and community engagement and investment. That was all about social value and PPN 06. Let's go straight into the project. So, right, I'll give you a bit of background of the project before I actually talk about what are the tasks and the deliverables that we did for the client. Before I tell you about the background, what was the project? So the project was a construction and redevelopment project with one of the NHS trusts. Now, this project was located in northeast of London, and they're dealing with acute healthcare. Now, the locality of this project was within 3 boroughs. It had surrounding 3 boroughs, London Borough of Waltham Forest, Redbridge, and Epping. Please note that all of these areas, when we did a survey, had a lot of percentage of people from deprived backgrounds as well. So something to keep at the back of your mind, thinking about the background, where we're coming from. The other thing to note is the hospital is already one of the largest employers in the area. I think they were employing over 3,500 staff from the local community. So that's basically what they were about. But in order for them to understand what was the makeup of the local community, what they did at the NHS Trust, so they collaborated with an organization called Locality. They carried out an assessment to understand the community that they served. Okay, and what were the social value issues, challenges for those local people? The data that came out of the survey confirmed what we already knew of these local boroughs. So there were people who faced issues such as long-term illness, there was youth violence, child obesity, for example, high levels of percentage of persons who didn't have any significant qualifications that would lead them into profitable jobs. For example, there was food vulnerability as well. Okay, so they understood the local profile around the project. What about the key stakeholder groups? Because at the end of the day, they needed to understand who had an interest in the project, who would be opposed to it, who were the key stakeholders that they needed to continuously consult with. So the typical stakeholder groups for this NHS Trust was existing and future businesses, your local residents, local schools and other educational centers, site visitors, the patients of the hospital themselves, hospital employees, carers of the patients, local authorities, and other healthcare partners, just to name a few. Right. Once they did their survey of the stakeholder groups and of course the locality and the local people and knew and understood what that local profile is, they then set about defining what's the vision that they were going to try to achieve via the project and of course after the project as well. And what they came up with is they wanted an integrated health and social care system, almost like a health and well-being campus, to bring together a collection of services. So they didn't want to just give medical care to the local population. They wanted to give a holistic care dealing with housing, whether it was leisure or culture, to give that holistic care back to the local community. They almost came up with their own definition of social value. And for them, that meant to create opportunities and enable a long-term legacy, almost like a transformational long-term legacy. So let this sink in. This is the background of the project. It's an NHS project, construction redevelopment in an area of London with a lot of deprived population. They've already got health and well-being issues, long-term unemployment, key stakeholder groups, a lot of strong voices in the room. I'll come to that in a little bit. And then, of course, this project wanted to deliver a lot in terms of social value. So that's your background right there. As part of the project, we had two main tasks to deliver, and this sits in line with ISO 2400 as well. That is sustainable procurement. So defining your policy and strategy before you just blindly start to embed things into your procurement process. So like I said, social value is the outcome of sustainability being embedded into the procurement process. The two main things the client wanted for us to do is to tidy up their social value strategy. It was incomplete and all over the place because they had conflicting views from all of their stakeholders. So we needed to assess what's the social value policy strategy, make it robust, and then align it with PPN 06. So quite a big task there. Once that was done, then develop tender questions to achieve social value in preparation for them going out to tender for their main works procurement for that hospital project. So two main tasks, we were clear on what it is we needed to do. We understood their stakeholder group. So social value strategy was incomplete. We just could not get consensus from internal stakeholders. That's a challenge. And we could not define what was local and hyperlocal. So one of the things here was that they had a lot of KPIs around local employment, using local businesses. But when they did that survey with that organization called locality, what they realized is there was no capacity and capability in the immediate vicinity of the boroughs of the project to employ those people or to do STEM events or to meet those targets in terms of social value. So they were in a dilemma as to how to define what local meant to them. They took a step back and they did a multi-tiered approach to defining local for the project. So they started with category 1. All of the wards that were directly adjacent to the hospital, that were directly affected by the proximity of the project, that was category 1, and that was hyperlocal. Category 2, all of the local boroughs who were the main users of the hospital, that was category 2, and that was local. Category 3, the neighboring boroughs of East London, that was category 3, and that was East London. And finally, they came up with category 4, which was all of the remaining boroughs, the rest of the boroughs in Greater London. So hyperlocal, local, East London, and Greater London. Once they had visibility of how they defined the areas, especially on a geographical map, they could then go back realistically to the ultimate client to say, these are the targets that we can achieve from a hyperlocal vicinity. This is what we can give you from local. If we can't achieve that, can we then go out to the Greater London borough? So once they had that clarity in mind, then we were comfortable enough that we would be able to help them achieve their social value targets as well. The other things to understand is the nuances around any project, especially large construction or any infrastructure project as well. What's your geographical location? Where are you situated? Especially when you talk about achieving social value, there will be some targets or KPIs that will not be possible in a certain geographical location, for example. It won't be possible in a certain sector or industry. The other thing with this project is, because it was a pilot project for the NHS Trust in terms of embedding PPN 06 into a redevelopment project, all eyes were on them. Not just the press and the newspapers, but all of the other NHS trusts and the hospital trusts were looking to this project to set the scene and set the bar in terms of, if we have further construction redevelopment projects within the NHS, we will follow what's been done in this project. So no pressure on us and no pressure on the client, but those were the challenges that we were facing. So what were the actions that we took? So I reviewed the existing policy and strategy. The client called it the vision and objectives paper. My challenge was it needed to be complete. Secondly, align it to suit the project nature and sector, but also align it with PPN 06. I looked at the themes of PPN 06 and they weren't directly aligning with the hospital redevelopment project. So what we did is we tweaked it to ensure it met the project needs as well, but also met the needs of the locality and the sector. So these are the 5 themes that we came up with. The first theme was supply chain. Within that, the topics were supply chain resilience, supply chain capacity, most importantly, supply chain management and accessibility. So that was theme number 1, supply chain. The second theme that we came up with was employment and skills. So ensuring skills and training development, employment opportunities, workforce equality, diversity, and inclusion. So that was theme number 2. Theme number 3 is quite common, it's within PPN 06. So your environmental sustainability considerations, so energy efficiency, climate change, you talk about climate adaptation and mitigation both, resource efficiency, waste management, recycling, circular economy. But one of the peculiarities of the project, because of where it was located, for them, top of the agenda was green travel. So maybe using cycles a bit more or using public transport. It wasn't very easy to access for the local community, the carers or the patients or the visitors. So green travel was one of the top priorities within theme number 3, that was environmental sustainability. Theme number 4 was health, safety, and well-being. So not just of the staff and the supply chain, like I said, they really wanted to engage with the local community. So health, safety, well-being of the public as well, and community health and cohesion. And finally, our last theme for them was outcome benefits, which is leaving a lasting legacy, community engagement, and investment. Once we finalized this with the client, between ourselves and the client, that these were the 5 themes that would align them to the project nature, sector, and PPN 06, then we had to deal with the massive challenge of, okay, we've done that. How do we get all of your stakeholders on board? Are we right in what we've determined as your 5 themes? Have we got it totally wrong? So that was a big task ahead of us. The way we did this is that we ran 2 separate workshops for the stakeholders, because you could not have everyone in one room. It would basically be a shouting or probably even a boxing match. So we had an internal stakeholder workshop and an external stakeholder workshop. Who were these stakeholders? So internal to the project, that was the investors, the planning team, design, construction team, operations team. The external stakeholders in their workshop were local third sector organizations, patients, carers, site visitors, employees, local residents, business, education institutes, so on and so forth. So 2 separate workshops for us to run these 2 groups of stakeholders to say, these are the themes of social value that we've come up with. Have we got it correct? Have we missed anything out in terms of what's important to you? And to hear from them so that we could finalize that vision and objectives, also known as a policy and strategy paper. I can fortunately say that we weren't very far from what was important to them. We found some common themes engaging, and what was important to both groups was that leaving a lasting legacy piece, health and well-being, not just of the staff, but also of the supply chain, but also increasing in training opportunities and local employment opportunities. So while I can say we had stakeholders with competing needs, I think finally through the workshops, they started to see eye to eye and started to collaborate in a better manner. One of the other hurdles we hit, and those of you who are in construction and work in infrastructure as well, you know about the section 106 requirements. So this project had such onerous and stringent requirements in terms of social value within section 106. One of the examples was if they didn't achieve having 197 apprentices on board in the 4-year duration of the project, they would have to pay back as a penalty 3% of the total project value as calculated on the end day of the project being completed, or something like that. And that probably went into millions of pounds worth. We digested that and we came up with a plan of how to deal with that, because I will tell you this, ladies and gentlemen, is very simple. Sustainability and social value cannot be forced on you as a client, organization, or main contractor, or down your supply chain. It's something that needs to be done genuinely in a collaborative manner. And the way we dealt with it is we had a meeting with the client. It was for them to, of course, engage with their stakeholder to sort this out, to say, negotiate for reasonable endeavors. And what do I mean by that? For us to engage with the supply chain to ensure how many apprentices we could get on board realistically, so a market testing activity almost, and feed that back to the client. Reasonable endeavors, but also secondly, can we do a swap in metrics and targets? And this is something I'll ask you to consider as well when you're negotiating your contracts in terms of social value. If I can't give you 197 apprentices, can I increase the number of STEM activities I do? Can I increase the number of returners to work, for example? Can I increase the percentage on some other social value targets or KPIs? So reasonable endeavors, but also swap in the requirements. And that was a very, very collaborative discussion that they absolutely needed to have with their clients. So we overcome that hurdle as well. Once we had the consensus both internally and externally that yes, we were on the right path in terms of the themes that we had come up with for this client, it was then for us to now start developing the social value tender questions. What would those model responses look like? And of course, an evaluation model for the procurement team to evaluate the bids and the tenders coming back. Like I said, the questions needed to include for qualitative and quantitative responses, not just the qualitative examples or your written typed text as well. So how did we go about that? Let me just move this up a little bit. And why did we do that? So I'll start by giving you a couple of examples of the qualitative examples and then questions, and then I'll talk you through the quantitative one. So one of the themes that I mentioned that we came up with was skills and employment. The qualitative question that we used for the tender process was, please provide us with a skills and education plan outlining how you will ensure skills development for staff, the supply chain, and the local community, of course, in the project duration, and how you will measure the impact of training. So this was a qualitative question within the theme of skills and employment. Another example I'll give you, and that's within the supply chain management team, is how will you ensure diverse and local suppliers will have a fair opportunity to compete for supply chain bids and opportunities and actually win work on the project. So that was within the theme of supply chain. So these were the types of qualitative questions we came up with. Why did we insist on quantitative responses as well? What did it look like? What was the reasoning behind this? So one of the things is that with social value and embedding sustainability, it's not about let and forget. You've awarded the contract and you're not going to do anything about it once your subcontractor supplier is on board, but it's for you to performance manage your supply chain, gather the data, and actually use a social value or sustainability tool to ensure that I have embedded these KPIs and targets into the awarded contract. How is my supply chain performing out in site, not just in delivering the technical scope, but the sustainability angle as well? Measure, monitor, and manage that so it's meeting your overall goal of your project and, of course, your ultimate client as well. And that's the reason we came up with quantitative responses. A, to give the supply chain visibility of that once, if you were successful on this project and in this contract, you will be measured on social value. These are the kinds of metrics and KPIs that will be used. And how did we develop this? We took an agnostic view of all of the social value platforms that are out there in the market, and I say agnostic because we've got our own sustainability tool. We gathered together all of the measurable, the mathematical calculations that we call metrics, put them in an Excel sheet, and turn them into quantitative questions to give it to the supply chain to say, if you are awarded this contract, you will be expected to report data that looks like this. So it gave them a feel of what's to come, so they weren't in the dark post-contract award. But secondly, it also gave us and the client visibility of what is the supply chain actually capable of, what's the capacity to meet our social value requirements, because the client, like I said, they had very onerous requirements and we couldn't be fooling around. So we needed to gauge what the supply chain was capable of. The supply chain needed to have a visibility on what data they would need to report in, how often and what that would look like. And that's the reason for the quantitative responses. Having said that, it was basically Excel sheets with a whole lot of metrics and targets. But what we did with that Excel sheet is we only ticked the ones that said, can you give us some indicative numbers or percentage targets at bid stage? And once you've awarded the contract and you've got full visibility and a feel for the project, then we'll start to firm up these numbers and percentages and do an addendum to your contract at the end. A couple of examples of those quantitative responses. So number of work placements that you can afford to this project in the 4-year duration, for example, number of site visits that you can arrange for school children, number of weeks of apprenticeships, for example, on board in this contract duration, number of meet the buyer events that you can plan and organize for us in the project duration, percentage of invoices that you're going to absolutely pay in that 30-day period, number of initiatives that you are going to hold for community groups, etc. So we wanted to get a feel of what that would look like, and of course give the supply chain visibility as well, and hence the quantitative responses. One of the challenges for me was the contract management duty. Like I said, you can't just let and forget, but at that point in time, there was no contract management team. They hadn't even been recruited on site. My client, bless him, on that side, they were just him, I think, functioning as the lead for procurement. They didn't even have enough procurement officers in-house. So all said and done, I could write a fancy contract management piece, but there may not be quantity surveyors or commercial managers at the time, but that was part of the requirements. So we did it anyways. What was the outcome of that? So first things first, we had 2 important tasks to carry out. Tidy up their policy and strategy that they call the visions and objectives paper. I described to you how we did that via the workshops, via PPN 06, aligning it with that. So we had a very neat and very tidied up social value policy and strategy called the visions and objectives paper. Then we had the set of tender questions for all of the themes that I mentioned that was developed. We developed what responses would look like. But most importantly, we needed to have a scoring mechanism without ambiguity. And what do I mean by that? Social value could not be a pass-fail on this project at all. It could not be 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, poor, little poor, really poor, brilliantly good, not so good. We needed for it to be objective and add to the scoring of the balanced scorecard. So we kept it really simple. We kept it poor, good, excellent. It sounds like subjective words, but we put text around it. Poor response basically meant that the supply chain partner, the potential tenderer, did not understand the question, or they understood the question, did not fully answer it, took a pragmatic view about it, or basically they did not meet the requirements of that question and of the client. A good answer basically meant that you understood the question, you answered all elements of it, you're meeting the requirements of the client and that project. And excellent meant you understood the question, you answered every element of it, but you went over and beyond that, and you've offered over and above that some added value in terms of social value, or you are demonstrating that you can for that project. So poor, good, excellent, we kept it at that. Because at that point of time, they absolutely needed the guidance, so that in absence of a sustainability team to assess those bid responses and a commercial team to assess the bid responses, that gave the procurement manager absolute clarity that once the social value aspect of the bids came in, I could clearly evaluate it and score it. Poor, good, and excellent also had some marks and weighting aligned to it, which would then feed into their balanced scorecard as well. And that was the outcome. So the scoring mechanism gave them visibility of how the questions would be scored. It was simplified and really, really implementable. It gave them examples of what good and inadequate responses would look like. Gaining consensus took a little bit of time because we engaged with all of the internal stakeholders, again, especially with the health and safety managers, to understand, have we formulated the right questions? Have we missed anything out in terms of what was important to them from a hospital perspective? So that took a little bit of time, but we overcome that as well. The contract management piece and the performance management piece for me is always, always important. And it's not just in relation to this project. And I'll tell you why. I evaluate a lot of tender documents for consultancy clients and look at the bids coming back in as well. And for those of you who use NEC contracts, NEC3, NEC4, that's what I've always used in my career. And what I'm most familiar with is that why are our social value and sustainability clauses, KPIs, and targets everywhere else in the contract except in the right place? If your technical scope goes into your scope, your subcontract works information or your services information, that's exactly where your sustainability targets, KPIs need to go in as well. Because if you're doing a project in line with certain technical scope, then it needs to be sustainable as well. So our sustainability targets and KPIs need to be fed in there as well. And what I usually see is you've got a modern slavery clause somewhere else. You've got something around waste and plastic in an X clause and something else in a Z clause, all over the place, leaving the supply chain to start looking for your sustainability clauses rather than you tying it all neatly into the scope document. So one of the things we did is, when they would write out their technical scope, is to ensure the visions and objectives, their social value policy paper, fed into the scope itself, maybe as an appendix, but it was right then and there. So that was an important piece for me. Then we also checked clauses around reporting of data. So if you want to do supply performance management, whether it's every month or every quarter, what's the clause in there for that? The duration of that, who were the stakeholders that would get involved? When we had visibility of what we wanted them to report data on, we started to write right down to that granularity over there as well. The good thing is that the project got a little bit delayed, I think, on the main works tender, and they had visibility of what the social value tool would be that they are going to use. So we even wrote that into the tender process, and that gives you supply chain visibility of, if I bid for this piece of work, these are the quantitative responses. This is when I need to feed data, and I will be performance managed, and I will be using this tool. So absolute visibility all the way down to the supply chain, and that's quite a neat process over there. So they were lucky enough to choose a social value tool right at the start. So we wrote that into the contract and performance management piece as well. So for me, that was really, really important. When I finished the project, we still had the challenge of a lack of a contract management team, but hopefully, I'm guessing by today, they've got some QSs and commercial managers on site out there. But we did develop the whole performance management piece, in that once your subcontractor and suppliers steps onto site and they start carrying out the scope of works, goods, work, services, what that is, and you start to performance manage them, keeping in mind your baseline of month one or quarter one, and then subsequent quarters, and start to see the trends of good, bad, ugly, then what? What if they're absolutely meeting your targets and smashing it out the park? What kind of incentives you could give them? They tend to be repeat work or monetary incentives or an award, something like that. But rather than going down the route of penalty clauses, what can you do in terms of hold the hand of the supply chain, take them with you on a sustainability journey? So a little bit of a supply action plan as well. So we did this as an added value to the consultancy client. They didn't really ask for it, but I could see that they were in dire need of a contract and performance management piece. So we did this as an added value in the consultancy piece for our client. Buyers and suppliers, what you need to think about. If you're a buyer, you're on the buying side of this an organization, embed social value throughout the project. And what do I mean by that? If you leave it too late, sustainability and social value will cost you an arm or a leg, because you're literally hitting the supply chain with your requirements right at the end. Go before ITT, so PQQ, one step before early contractor involvement, and that can take the shape of a meet the buyer, meet the contractor event, or pick up the phone and have a Teams call and communicate what your social value requirements are. Don't ask for everything. All 5 teams, if you're using PPN 06, won't be applicable to all of your trades or works packages. Select the ones that are relevant, and also ensure It's relevant to the scope, value, duration, and the nature of organizations in that tender list. Consider what questions are asked at tender stage. You need robust, hard-hitting, commitment-based questions at tender stage. Capacity capability checks 1 step earlier at PQQ. Make it contractual. Don't forget to write your targets and KPIs into the contract and measure and monitor performance once that's done. As part of supply performance management, ask for data to back it up. Not the supply chain is going to lie to you, but if you've asked for 10 apprentices on board and they said we've smashed the target, we've given you 20, then do ask for data on those apprenticeships, on the volunteering activities, or how have they minimized waste and packaging in your product. So ask for data to back up that social value or the value add. And of course, share positive outcomes as well and incentivize your suppliers. Suppliers, when you are bidding for work where you've got sustainability and social value questions in there, set out in your head clear, measurable targets that are actually achievable and doable by yourself. When you're bidding for work, and I remember talking to suppliers on a face-to-face workshop last week on High Speed 2, and I told them this: don't leave it up to the buying team or the procurement team to start to extract added value or social value. When you put in a tender or a bid, make it really clear in terms of we can give you this added value benefits or social value or sustainability benefits, because on the buying side, we rarely have time to start to extract all of that information. Suppliers focus on quality, not quantity. Don't start to promise the moon on the stick if that's not realistic. But I will say to my SME suppliers here, who usually get worried saying, I'm not a large player in the market, I'll probably get cut off out of this tender list. And I'd say to you, demonstrate where you are on your social value and sustainability journey. You may not be as mature as the larger players in the market, but you might just have a carbon reduction policy or an environmental management policy or a waste reduction policy. Give that documentary evidence. How have you helped a previous client or a previous project achieve that social value? You can do a little bit of a case study so that when the buyer's procurement team evaluate the bids, they know what your capacity is, and be specific, don't be vague about it. Right, we have finished the webinar for today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Q&A in the Q&A section box, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And before we go to Q&A, what I will do is I will put the feedback link in the chat as well. So those of you who are in a hurry or in a rush, you can fill in the feedback form. We do appreciate feedback, and the rest of you do get your questions in so that I can answer all of them. We do have plenty of time. Like I said, we finished a bit early today, so I'm just gonna give me a few seconds. I'm just gonna put on the feedback form link in the chat box to everyone. So it's just a couple of multi-choice questions. If everyone can fill in the feedback form, that will be great. So I'm going to start taking the questions in the Q&A box. Right, so anonymous attendees. So if 10% is a mandated minimum wage and 44% was high scoring for social value, the average that people go for, I've seen, is 20%, and you see that on large infrastructure projects, especially. So 20% of the balanced scorecard usually goes to social value or sustainability. From that 20%, 10% or 8% usually just goes for the carbon management angle of that 20%. So that's what I typically see, especially in large infrastructure projects. I would not be a template of the social value metric spreadsheet. So, Chris, so I could send you a couple of examples. Let me just make a note of that, Chris, while the question is still live. So, a template of social value, just bear with me, I'm writing on a post-it note here. Template of social value metrics spreadsheet. So let me see what I can. If I can't give you the full template, what I'll do is I'll do you a little Excel sheet. Of course, I'll send it to everyone, not just Chris, of a couple of metrics. So at least you have some starting point examples as well. Anonymous attendee, very brilliant question. What if the local supply chain don't even know what social value is? Forget about helping us achieve targets, please. I will point you in the way of the Supply Chain Sustainability School. It's our online school that has thousands of online free resources. A lot of our partners and members are registered on there. Use it to upskill yourself. Put your supply chain on a couple of webinars, e-learning, lunch and learn as well. It does not need to be time consuming. We've got resources on there in this topic, starting from a 2-minute YouTube short video right to 120 minutes web link or a white paper. So like you are here today to upskill yourself, put your supply chain as well on a learning journey, hold their hand and take them along on a journey. So I would say supply chain sustainability school is the best way. It's free at the point of use to upskill your supply chain as well. And honest attendee, hopefully that answers your question there. Right. So how would you go about, the questions are jumping around. How would you go about creating a robust evaluation process for social value, which is completely new to a new procurement team, and there's concern about being vulnerable to legal challenge. So I think, Rachel, keep it completely objective, but keep it simple. Don't start to go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, really good, absolutely good, rubbish, completely rubbish. Just go with excellent, good, and poor. But sit down. If you do have a sustainability team, or even if you don't, start to map out, because you will be evaluating other sections of the bid as a procurement or a buying team. What does good, poor, excellent mean to you? Think about that in the sustainability space. So a good response, whether it's on the technical, quality, health and safety, or sustainability angle, basically means supplier, subcontractor X has understood the question fully, answered all of the elements of the question, and is meeting your requirements, whether it's technical or sustainability. An excellent answer in all of these spaces would also mean they understood the question, answered all of your requirements, they're going over and above that. And a poor response would basically mean either they haven't answered the question, they choose not to answer the question, or they've missed some bullet points and it's not meeting the requirements. So keep it as simple. If you're worrying about the legal angle of that, if you do have in-house lawyers or contract managers or QSs, consult with them. And that would be something I would tell you from my experience as well. To everyone who's on the call, thank you for still hanging around. Please go to the feedback form and fill it in. It's in the chat box. It's just a couple of multiple choice questions over there. Anonymous attendee. Some buyers in my sector, that's your sector, include social value in the quality element of the scoring. No, it does not. Do I find that this dilutes the importance of social value? It does not at all, but when you include it in the qualitative element of the scoring, so when you say price, wherever the bids have come in that price, commercial T's and C's, so let's say they want X80 limit of liability, so you've given them less points, etc. Then when you say qualitative aspect of the scoring, break it down. What is that qualitative aspect? Technical quality, health and safety, sustainability, social value. Don't just say qualitative element, and somewhere within that, you're assuming social value is in there. So undiluted by explicitly evaluating social value, and put a line item or a section especially for that. That would be my advice to you, and that's what we did in High Speed 2 as well. Many thanks for the webinar. I have an online survey on social value delivery. The questions are jumping, sorry. Thank you for the webinar. You have an online survey, social value delivery. How can you reach out to respondents? So I'm not really sure, but Billy, you might be able to answer the question. So we've got a participant who would like to reach out to all of the other participants on today's webinar, and she's got a survey for you today. Probably through our marketing officer. So Billy is busy typing a response to you there. Billy has also put in the chat the link for the supply chain sustainability school. Like you say, if your buying team is new and your supply chain is not aware about social value, what does it mean? Just go onto the school. I'm still a student of the school since 2015, which is why I've taken this career path today. And get learning, do some lunch and learns, look at some YouTube video shorts that we've created within the school, read some web links and white papers, and it's free to upskill yourself as well. Come on, keep the questions coming. There's no more questions, I think. Let me check if I've answered everything. There was one, yes, you will receive, the recording for the session will be available on the Supply Chain Sustainability School, so everyone can view the recording. I'm not sure when exactly the recording becomes live, but also, yes, you will get all of the slide decks as well. I'm just quickly checking if there are any more questions. Right. I'm just going to give it 30 seconds or 60 seconds more. for any questions. And Billy has kindly also put into the chat that we've got some other upcoming webinars as well. As you know, we've got the brand new standard, the BSI 25700, really hard to roll off the tongue. It's the new standard for modern slavery. We've been instrumental, my colleague Helen Carter has been instrumental in shaping the new standard for modern slavery. Do attend this webinar. It's going to be really, really important for you. And we're really, really proud to present this new standard in modern slavery for you. Going to wait for, yes, there's one more question. So there's a new webinar, in a recent webinar of S&P Global, the VP Sustainability mentioned that they have over 7,000 suppliers. How would you deal with such a number in procurement? So when you've got a large supply chain, I remember delivering a sustainable procurement training for SIPs, and one of the participants said they've got over 4,000 suppliers for door frames and hinges. And I would say to you is segregate your spend. So look at your top 10, top 20 suppliers in terms of the duration of the contract, what is the complexity of the scope, and thereby the complexity in the risk, sustainability risk that are bringing onto you, the benefits in terms of opportunities for social value, but also these days, what are the geographical locations of the supply chain? Because there are certain areas in the world that naturally have issues of human rights and modern slavery as well. You know, we were coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. None of us expected the Russia-Ukraine crisis to happen, but a lot of the products, the components of products and goods are transiting that geopolitical area as well. And that has made us a lot nervous. When I talk about sustainability on my sustainable procurement workshops, and you can talk about FSC and PFC and ethically sourced timber, glass, aluminum, and the suppliers are like, Mel, we can't even get glass, aluminum and timber, and you're trying to talk about sustainability. There's still a shortage in the market, so taking it with a pinch of salt. So think about geographical location, the duration of your contract, the complexity of scope, but also start with your top 10, top 20. If possible, start with your top 40 spend as well. You won't be able to manage 7,000 suppliers. Having said that, it's not an excuse for you not to have visibility, at least starting with your policies, and especially the most important ones in terms of human rights, modern slavery, and of course, carbon management as well. So hopefully that's answered your question. Right, it's 11:30. I'm not sure if there are any more questions. I'm just going to hang on for a minute more. Billy is happily constantly probing you all to attend more of our sessions. It'll be a nice continuity from what you have attended today as well. Do go back to the feedback form link. I'm just going to repost it because Billy, you've added so many resources. My feedback form has gone right to the top. There's a feedback form link. Billy has posted a couple of resources as well for you there. So it doesn't look like there are any more questions to come. I'm just going to wait till the clock turns 11:31 and then I can end the session for today. But thank you for everyone who's made the time to be on the session today. Hopefully you found it useful and how to practically embed social value considerations into your procurement process. Right, we're at 11:31. Thank you for being a brilliant audience. You can see me, I can't see you because we're on Zoom webinars as a setting. Hopefully you reach out to some of the resources we posted in the chat box, and see you again in some more of our sessions. Have a great day. Ciao for now.